All right, Madeleine Dean. Madeleine, please join us. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Very excited to have you here.
Thanks, Christine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So 5 minutes on background. Kim will hold up yellow when you're at 1 minute and red when you're at 10 seconds.
Okay,
All right? Thank you.
very good. And I can't help. You'll have to forgive me. It is a great day in Pennsylvania. I have a friend who's a map maker. This probably cuts into my 5 minutes on background.
Yes.
But this is what we need to know. It's a historic day. My name's Madeleine Dean. I'm running for Congress because we are at an exciting time in Pennsylvania government, Pennsylvania history. We have an historic seat at the table, and I'd like to serve in that seat. I'll leave this here for now, and I know you did have a nice presentation there, but I think it's very exciting. So a little bit of background on me. Actually, before I start, it would be inappropriate not to say some of the obvious. Number one, we've got an historic seat. Number two, we have 4 Democrats running for this seat. I happen to know every one of them and have worked with every one of them and admire every one of them. Joe Hoffel and I go back so far that he is credited with introducing me to my husband. It was literally, if you don't know what Joe Hoffel has done good in his life, that's what he did. It was 1978. I was a newly elected 18-year-old committee woman. My husband, P.J. Canan, lived down the road, and he was a 19-year-old committee man. And Joe Hoffel came up to me and said, I want you to go down the street here. I would like you to be volunteer coordinator. I thought, wow, that's a big title. Okay. It was for his 1978 re-elect to the very seat that I sit in now, the Pennsylvania House. So we have long, long ties between our family and between our beliefs in democratic values. And Shira and Mary Jo I work with every single day in the Pennsylvania House for the last almost 6 years on issues that we care deeply about, and I respect them. But let me cut to the chase. How about a little about me? My name is Madeleine Dean. I'm running for Congress in the 4th Congressional, and I want to earn your support. I've lived in Montgomery County my whole life. My husband and I were both raised there. In fact, my father was raised there. I've got my eldest brother here. We're a large family. I'm the youngest of 7, Bob the eldest. And it is a delight and an honor to be able to serve in the Pennsylvania House, serving my hometown, and friends and neighbors and people who helped shape me. As a young woman, in my first career, I was a practicing attorney in Philadelphia and in Montgomery County. I was an advocate. I loved fighting for people and for their rights, and especially because they didn't think they had a voice. In my middle career, because my husband and I started having children, we had 3 little boys. They're now all grown. I decided that the full-time practice of law was going to be a little too much. And so I came home, started a little 3-woman law firm, but then had the opportunity to teach at LaSalle University, where I taught for 10 years. I taught writing and rhetoric, ethics, and I taught in the business school. I loved it. But I knew I wanted to get into public service from those seeds planted long before. And so in my 50s, I ran for township commissioner, and I won. I actually was asked to run, and I said no at first, thinking, oh no, I want to really jump in a bigger way. But it happened to be the weekend that Gabby Giffords was shot. And my husband and my sons and I sat around and said, wait a second, you thought you wanted to serve? Then you better serve. And so I did. I ran for township commissioner and I won, and then I ran for the state house and I won. So why me? I want to go to Washington to do just the same thing I'm doing in Harrisburg, which is fighting. I started the PA Safe Caucus in Harrisburg after Sandy Hook to fight gun violence. I was elected Southeast Delegation Chair to lead 22 members of our caucus. The governor appointed me the first and only legislator to the Pennsylvania Commission for Women. When I was first elected, I remember the first time I spoke on the floor of the House. I stood up and spoke about a lousy payday lending bill. And the speaker let me know that I shouldn't do that. He said, freshmen don't speak. I said, well, I don't know if I'll get to be a sophomore. I'm elected to serve. I'm going to speak. And I'll tell you what, I did speak, I continue to speak, and that issue of silencing folks on the floor of the House is no longer. What I've done in those days since is consistently introduce legislation, bold legislation that others would not. I introduced one of the first jail tax bills, education funding, universal background checks, bump stocks, banning of bump stocks, housing protections for domestic violence victims, housing protections for seniors. So that's some of my background to let you know some of the things I'm doing. I'm a member of the Appropriations Committee, Vice Chair of Finance. I've served on the Ethics Committee. So those are some of the things that I care about and some of the background that I have. And now I'm to pause. Everybody take a drink?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
It is very hard to say top 3 priorities, but I'm going to use 3 that will become the umbrella for all others. And they're very interconnected, so I think you might understand. When I first ran, I ran on a collection of E's, the 3 E's. So education, the economy and jobs, and ethics and good government. Think of how intertwined those 3 E's are. How we educate our children determines our future, not just theirs, but ours. It also determines our economic stability and their future. So that's what I ran on, the economy and jobs, educating our kids. And the final piece is ethics and good government, and I'll break that out a little more. I was delighted to be asked to serve on the Ethics Committee in Harrisburg. When I ran for office, I said, I'm never going to take a per diem, I'm not taking a phone, I'm not taking a car, I will submit actual expenses. I'm one of the few legislators who actually posts her expenses online every month, so you know exactly what I'm doing. I'm in it for the work, I'm not in it for perks, I'm not in it for per diems. That's the way I believe public service must be. So, education, the economy and jobs, ethics and good government. So what do I mean? Here are some of the nuts and bolts below that. Education is number 1. So I'll fight for universal pre-K. We're fighting for that in the Pennsylvania House, but I'll fight for it in Washington. I'll fight for free community college, and I'll fight for interest-free student debt. Our students should not be suffering under crushing debt with interest rates of 6, 7, 8, 11%. If you can buy a car for 0%, you better not have to pay more for your education. I believe that health care is a right, not a privilege. I believe in the woman's right to private choices in her health care decision. We know that that is the law of the land, and we must fight to protect it. We fight in Harrisburg to protect it. I'll do the same in Washington, D.C. We know that we can and must grow our economy through smart infrastructure investment, good paying jobs, a livable wage, strong union jobs. We know we have an obligation, moral and otherwise, to protect our environment, not just for us, but for our children and their children. And for ethics and good government, I believe it is the foundation of public service. You must hold us accountable to that, and that's where I stand. Ultimately, the other thing that we must do is fight the 2 epidemics, there are more E's, but sadly the epidemic of opioid addiction and death. When 64,000 people a year die of overdose, you know how that rocks a family, you know how that rocks a community. We must do more than what the president did. President Trump, all he did was call an emergency and put not $1 of resource or new thinking toward it. And the final one is gun violence. It is shameful in this country that 33,000 people a year die of gun violence, 2/3 of those from suicide, and another 80,000 people are literally wounded, caught in the crossfire. And you know that's thousands of children a year. It is unthinkable, and we can do something about it. We have a moral obligation to do something about it, and I'm optimistic because actually the children are leading. See what's happened in Parkland. Those brave, courageous, fearless, smart young kids who, by the way, credit their teachers with helping them craft smart arguments. You see what the difference education makes? They're speaking up. They're wise beyond their years, they're fearless beyond their years, they're speaking up, and they're going to make a difference. They're going to get leaders to absolutely do what they're supposed to do. I'm running to do all of those things because of what we all remember maybe on the day after the election in 2016. I don't know about you, but in my house there was some crying. I cried. My grown sons cried. My husband cried. And the first phone call I got in the morning was my granddaughter. She was on her way to preschool and her mommy handed her the phone. And she called me and she said, Mama, did Hillary win? I said, no, she didn't. And she was sobbing. She said, I know. My mommy told me she didn't win. She can win next year, right? In part, she thought it was a running race. And so she thought she just could run a little faster next year. But no, what that foretold was something we now are living. With Donald Trump in the White House, America is in a crisis. And the Republican majority is silent. That is what is stunning to me. I'm reminded of the words of Martin Luther King 50 years ago. He said, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies. We will remember the silence of our friends. It is their silence that is staggering and shameful. I won't be silenced. I wasn't silenced in Harrisburg, and I never will be. I won't be silenced in Washington. I'll fight for these and so many other issues that we care about. Because it's time. It's time that Montgomery County sent a strong, progressive, democratic woman's voice to Washington. It's time with these exciting fair districts that we actually grew the diversity of our caucus. You know that we sent 20 members to the federal delegation, not one is a woman. It's time for that to change. Just like the wisdom of these new maps and the energy that I feel in rooms like this, I am certain that as I think about it, and I think through the eyes of my granddaughter, Aubrey, next year, women will win. Thank you very much. All right, I think like Joe, that's enough.
That's enough? All right, that's enough.
Right.
Okay, they've been wanting more.
Well, I thank you for that essential question. And we do see very troubling responses and deregulation on the part of the Trump administration. And we see this actually, and I want to just make a parallel to the state government. Because I bring with me my Constitution. I guess you can see I'm into show and tell. But the Pennsylvania Constitution, one of the most beautiful sections of the Pennsylvania Constitution is Article 1, Section 27, which says that we have a right to our environment, to clean air, clean water, and our natural aesthetic. And that we are trustees, legislators are trustees, not just for now, but for generations to come. I say that every time I go into the appropriations hearings and we have the DEP in front of us, or the budget secretary in front of us, because how we budget reveals our priorities. And so I fight for more funding for the DEP. It's an exact parallel problem that we're having in Washington. The Republicans in Harrisburg have a hard time saying climate change. For some set of hearings, they actually would not acknowledge climate change, and they defunded the DEP at the same time, making it harder and harder for us to protect our environment and live up to our constitutional obligation. Same thing's going on every single day. You read a small snippet in the newspaper about what the Trump administration has done, allowing drilling in our waters, in our oceans, deregulating those regulations that were put on after the catastrophic spills. Every day, little articles and big. So what would I do? I'd fight for the very things I'm fighting for at the state level, because we have an obligation to protect our environment, to recognize that climate change is real. The Pope has warned us that we are the protectors of this planet. We get only one. And how do you do that? You protect it by making sure that regulation is robust, and that science is funded, and that we absolutely fund the EPA. Make sure that the people can do their job. Don't hold their hands behind their back at a time when our climate is in such peril. The very local example here is fracking. We know that, you know what, I feel like I've gone too long. I apologize. You know what, I'll stop there, because I just want you to see the parallels between the state and the federal, and I realized it was taking too long. Thank you. This couldn't be a more important topic area. One of the core functions of government is to provide a public school education to all of our children in an equitable way. And yet look at the times we are in, and the president who is serving us and disserving us. Somebody said recently that President Trump and his administration suffers from serial dishonesty. And it's true. We talk about alternative facts. serial dishonesty. All the more important that we educate our kids so they can cut through the crap, so that they can identify the dishonest statements. And so when we fail to educate our kids, when we fail to fund our schools, whether at the local, state, or federal level, we're failing ourselves, we're failing our future. Betsy DeVos, we all know, was a shameful appointment. It's a laughable appointment, except it's so very, very serious. Her comments the other night on 60 Minutes, when she was asked, did you ever visit an underperforming school? Never. It didn't even occur to her that that might be part of her job responsibility. Sadly, in Pennsylvania, we suffer the distinction of having one of the greatest disparities of how we fund schools for the children of the poor versus the children who are not poor. One of the broadest disparities in funding. And what does that say for the future of that 3-year-old, that 4-year-old, that 6-year-old, who doesn't get another shot at first grade when he or she was in a failing classroom? With leaders like Betsy DeVos, we're going to just sentence our kids to economic failure. We know that if we invest in pre-K, every dollar invested in pre-K saves $9, $10, $12 down the road in economic opportunity, in employment, in reduced incarceration. I believe in a robust public school system. The government has an obligation to support that. We know at the state level, Mary Jo and I know that we've been fighting for more dollars for public education so that it is not drained off to the charter schools and the cyber charters, as good as they are in terms of incubators. But we have an obligation to fund it now, for these kids now. And this administration has made it all the more critical that we educate our kids well so that they can be actively civically engaged and make good choices about who will lead them.
Great.
Healthcare is a right. It ought to be a right. It ought to be a fully funded and protected right. I do support Medicare for all. As a member of the Pennsylvania House, when the ACA came in, many of us in the Democratic caucus fought with Governor Corbett over the Medicaid expansion piece. Governor Corbett resisted the Medicaid expansion piece, which kept more than 1 million people out of insurance. Access to quality, affordable insurance. We fought for that. Fortunately, we did fire Governor Corbett, and we brought in Governor Wolf, who immediately expanded health care coverage under Medicaid. One of the most important reasons for that, and we need to get to universal, is some of the coverage that then became available to those who were without. Mental health coverage, addiction coverage, recovery services. That's the kind of stuff. If we want to move forward in this society, we need to take care of our vulnerable, those who are elderly, the children, the sick, those who suffer from disease or addiction or who struggle with mental health. We need to get to universal health care for all and for all levels of need.
Great, thank you.
You know, I've been in this fight and cared about this issue for a long time. I remember my husband and I dragged our 3 little boys at the time to the Million Mom March, and I was glad I did. As a legislator, I've been involved in this also. Prior to that, I was a teacher at LaSalle University, and guns were way too prevalent in that neighborhood. I had an adult student, yes, a mother of twins, 16-year-old twins, and she would tell me each night after class about her twins and what they were doing. And the next semester, I read an obituary, and I thought, oh my God, that's one of her boys. And sure enough, another 16-year-old shot this 16-year-old, killing him over, I don't even know the fight. We don't even know what it was. So we have a crazy problem in this country. And I think what startled me was when I got to Harrisburg, I was stunned that we had a hard time even talking about guns. Sandy Hook happened in my very first year in office, and many legislators were standing around wringing our hands. What can we do? What can we do? So we started the PA Safe Caucus, and I would ask you to take a look at our website, PA Safe, because on there you'll see a collection of legislators and advocacy groups. I work with Sharon, Mary Jo works on this too, and we have legislation. We have introduced session after session after session after session, only to die in judiciary. Can't get it out for a hearing or a vote. But guess what? The children will lead. It was just a week ago that the Republican chairman of Judiciary announced 4 days of hearings on gun violence, citing Parkland, citing Las Vegas, citing gun deaths. There's a lot we can do to save lives. Parkland startled me in a way I really didn't realize. I woke up that morning and it occurred to me, is it possible my 6-year-old granddaughter has to participate in active shooter drills? Stunning. I've been in this fight for years, and that never occurred to me. Must she learn how to bar the doors and find the corner and hide under something? We ask more of our children than we do of gun owners, than we do of gun manufacturers. It's insane. It is a question of our common humanity. We will make a difference. These children will lead us, and will pass sensible legislation. Let me end on one hopeful note that I don't think people really know. In Pennsylvania, we have an excellent background check system. The Pennsylvania State Police, the PIC system, the Pennsylvania Instant Check System, it's working, it's powerful. It identifies prohibited purchaser. It shares records with the NICS system. It's a really good program, and Major Scott Price, whom we know well, runs that program and takes it very, very seriously. But we leave a gaping hole in that safety net. Now, if you were to go fishing, you wouldn't go fishing with a net that had a gaping hole in it, would you? We have one gaping hole. It's called background checks, the private sale of long guns. We need to close that loophole. And what does that mean? I'll tell you real quickly. 2 Valentine's Days ago, my husband said, "You're always talking about background checks and gun shows. Oaks is having a gun show." So we went, romantic that he is, to the Oaks Gun Show. And just to observe, to try to understand, what does this mean? You know, I keep mouthing these words, I better actually understand it. And sure enough, 3 young people walked by a table of AR-15s. And I heard one of them say, because it was a licensed firearm dealer, I heard one of them say, "I'll buy the gun, and then I'll just say we sold it to you privately." People know the other person was a prohibited purchaser, his buddy would buy the gun and simply say, "I sold it to you privately, online, in my living room, in this hallway," it doesn't matter. We have the opportunity to pass legislation that would stop that and get guns out of the hands of prohibited purchasers. Force us as legislators, both at the state level and much more importantly at the federal level, to do just that. Shira is right, and your question raises so many points of inequity in our system. And sadly, under this administration and this Republican-controlled Congress, we are seeing that we're turning the clock back in so many ways in terms of racial justice and equity. I'm a member of the Judiciary Committee, and sadly, we chronically see lousy legislation to increase mandatory minimums, to keep people imprisoned longer, unjustifiably, and we know that disproportionately hits people of color. We fight over whether or not there should be cash bail. We know that disproportionately affects people of color. We see under this administration all kinds of attacks on civil liberties, not just people of color, but LGBT community, people of any ethnicity that is different. In the Southeast delegation, we wrote a letter in January of last year condemning the president for his Muslim ban. We see this, the civil rights, the equality that we prize in our American democracy is under threat by this administration and the bigoted programs that it puts forward. What would I do? I am constantly promoting legislation, and I'll just stick maybe in the area of criminal justice for appropriate expungement. I was just a part of an expungement clinic at Arcadia over the weekend. For reducing and eliminating mandatory minimums. Why in God's name do we pick judges? Do we elect judges if we then think the legislators ought to tell how long we sentence people? We're not sitting there, we're not the judge and jury, we're not hearing the evidence. And we know those kinds of measures are meant and have the absolute effect of hurting people's civil rights. We need to push back on that at every level and for every part of society.
Yes, yes or no?
Thank you for that question, a critically important question. We were just in my office today talking about the beginning of April, I think it might be about April 2nd, will be Equal Pay Day, where we mark the calendar with how much longer it takes a woman to earn a full year's salary. It takes another 3 months as compared with a man. That's, in this day and age, that's insane. I also have met with women who talk about the fact that when they come home and try to stay home and raise their children, their credit begins to suffer. Their rights begin to suffer. One woman talked to me about the fact that she couldn't even be on their mortgage because she was the stay-at-home mom. That's disgraceful. It's 2018. As you say, you came of age in the 70s. I came of age in the 60s and the 70s. And I think, you know, we have come so far in so many ways, but women's rights and women's equality, we haven't done it. So I'm a member of the Women's Caucus in the Pennsylvania House. We are constantly trying to promote legislation that will increase the minimum wage, because we know that minimum wage predominantly, disproportionately affects women. And there are all kinds of things that we can do. But you're absolutely right. One of the things we can do is elect more women, both at the state level and at the federal level. Because as soon as we do that, you know, right now in the Pennsylvania legislature, it's 20% women. None of us is a part of leadership. It's a bunch of middle-aged white guys. And as I say, I love middle-aged white guys. I'm married to one. But when we have no diversity of thought, when we have no diversity of conversation and robust problem solving, and so there's nobody sitting at the table to say, I suffered a loss of my rights because I chose to stay at home, and I lost earning power, and I lost credit worthiness, all wrong because I chose to be at home. We got to do something about it. We start by electing more women and fighting for those exact equal rights. I'll be really brief. It would be a top priority for me as a legislator in Congress. We've come so far in some ways. It took a long time, but think of 2012, when finally at the federal level it was recognized that, of course, equal rights to marriage. It was shortly after that that two of my best friends, they had announced they were going to be married, Michael and Dino, and they had been married in Massachusetts. It became legal there, but they wanted to be married here in Pennsylvania. So they called me one day, I knew about the wedding, and they said, we want you to marry us. And so it was one of the greatest honors of my life to be able to officiate the wedding of Michael and Dino Kelly Cataldi, two dear, dear people to me. And what Shira said is where I go on this. I am so optimistic, even though we have an administration that would attack anybody's rights, LGBT rights, civil rights, you name, immigrant rights, anybody, women, obviously women. Our children don't see it that way. We have 3 grown sons. They don't care. They don't see a difference. And I look through the lens of my granddaughter. She's 6 years old. Her first president was African American. She paid no mind to that. She just loved Barack Obama. That's what she would say. She thought her second president was going to be a woman. She paid no mind to that. She doesn't even understand that that never happened before. Somebody who is gay or lesbian, transgender, she doesn't give a damn. She just likes people. And so I would be very central in what I believe is that we have to treat everybody with dignity, respect, and with the equality that they deserve.
Great, thank you.